ordinance if a property owner applicant wishes relief for a portion of the ordinance. State law provides for an avenue of appeals, hence name zoning board of appeals. The zoning board must find 4 conditions exist in reviewing an application in order to grant the variance. If all 4 conditions are met, the board can grant approval for a variance from the ordinance. The 4 conditions that must be met are: 1, extraordinary or exceptional circumstances which apply to this parcel alone. 2, preservation of rights that a similar zone parcel would have. 3, no detriment to adjacent properties. 4, the request is not in such a general nature that the ordinance should be changed. Unlike a decision by the planning commission that must be approved or can be overturned by the city commission, the decision by the zoning board of appeals is final. There is no review or opportunity for overturning by the city commission. The Zoning Enabling Act provides a section 606(3). An appeal from a decision of the zoning board of appeals shall be filed within 30 days after the zoning board of appeals issues its decision in writing, signed by the chairperson, if there is a chairperson, or signed by members of the zoning board of appeals, if there is no chairperson, or within 21 days after the zoning board of appeals approves the minutes of its decision. The court may affirm, reverse, modify the decisions of the zoning board of appeals. The court may make other orders as justice requires. And I'm not gonna go, I think we got nobody else in the audience, so I'm not, I don't think we're gonna go any further than that. I know we need some approval for minutes of July the 25th. I need a motion to approve those minutes.
Make that motion.
Motion by Brian,
I'll support that.
supported by Patrick.
Yes.
Any questions on the minutes before I call for a vote? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Pose same sign, minutes are approved. And we have the variance request. Applicant hereby requests permission to. In October 2017, we had a fire on our property that destroyed the garage that was there, and we are requesting a variance to rebuild the garage in the same location, which is less than 5 foot from the property line as previous garage, allowing us to utilize the cement slab that was used for our previous garage. The cement slab has been inspected and was deemed okay to rebuild on. Above is contrary to the following section of the City of Walker zoning ordinance, section 94-352. Address is 1401 Maple Row Avenue Northwest. Property owner's name is Michael Quigley, is that correct? Okay, Michael Quigley. 1401 Maple Row Northwest. Applicant's name and address is the same as above. Zoning district is SA. Uses of existing premises, single family. Use of proposed premise, single family. Previous appeals are none. Owner states, under the reasons and grounds in support of the variance, exceptional or extraordinary circumstances. Though there is a variance from the code, our closest neighbor has no objections to the location or size of the proposed garage being rebuilt after the fire burned down the previous structure. Preservation of rights, too. C 1303 Granada Drive Northwest, approved 10/26 of 2011. No detriment. Our garage will be positioned so that it isn't easily visible to others. We are requesting to rebuild a garage the same size, 28 foot by 32 foot, in the same location as a structure that was previously there, which would allow us to utilize the cement slab that was already poured into the previous garage. Okay, let me see where the other reasons the grounds are at here. B, not a general problem. Our intent to rebuild the previous structure would be for storage of items rather than keeping them outside for others to see. So, anything that you'd like to add, Dan?
Sure. I'd like to provide a little bit of context for this case because though we've seen requests related to accessory buildings before, pretty frequently compared to some other types of requests, I don't think we've seen anything exactly along these lines, which is that this building was destroyed by a fire, so there's a little bit of uniqueness to this case. And I guess to frame up that part of the conversation, generally in Walker, if you have a building that gets damaged or there's harm caused to it by a natural disaster or fire, you can repair what you have even if it's non-conforming up to a certain degree. So the idea there is that you don't want to discourage or unduly hamper the ability to redevelop and use a property the way you've been using it. We encourage restoration and repair, but when you have a certain amount of repair, you're basically creating a new structure, and that's when it's time to bring the property more into compliance with current zoning. So we have a pretty lengthy section of code regarding that there needs to be a repair cost that does not exceed 75% of the appraised value of the structure according to the building official. In this case, I think the applicant made the call that this was going to exceed that cost, and that's a reasonable call to make. So rather than going through the rigmarole of determining the line-by-line costs of individual repairs, we looked at the entire thing as a variance request for the setback aspect.
Okay.
And I'll run through my slides, and then if you want to open the public hearing
Yep.
after that,
Yep.
that'll work fine.
Yep, you wanna run, make it up first, or open the hearing now, or
It doesn't, that'll work fine, yep, so if you wanna go ahead and take.
have a motion to open the public hearing?
Motion to open the
Roger
hearing.
makes the motion.
Second.
Brian, supported. All in favor of opening the public hearing, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Hearing is now open.
Okay, so you've already summarized the request, and I built on that a little bit more, but here's the way the structure looked. I think this image was as recent as 2017, prior to the fire in October. You can see some yard items there. That wasn't intentionally grabbed in this photo, but presumably that's cleaned up, and there's the structure that was there prior to the incident, and roughly the same footprint of what's being proposed to be rebuilt. I believe the actual setback as measured at the wall is something closer to 3 feet. Is that correct? So the actual setback is less than 5 feet, and they're looking to rebuild that structure in somewhat of the same form. One thing you'll see on this picture is it is a relatively large building compared to the principal dwelling. In some communities, you have a limit on the accessory building has to be proportional to the home. Here in Walker, if you're on a certain size lot or smaller, the threshold is the 900 square feet or 5% of the lot, whichever is greater. In this case, this building footprint is 896, so it falls under that threshold, and the size itself is not an issue. This is kind of a long, narrow lot, well over a quarter acre in size, and the dwelling itself is relatively small in relation to the accessory building, but that's okay. So we're not looking at a size variance or anything like that. We're just looking at the setback. I wanted to include this picture because there's a little bit of lack of detail on what's being proposed. I think the original building permit being issued in 87 lends to now we're trying to rebuild what we have, and we only have a certain amount of detailed information from that time. So my understanding is they are looking to roughly recreate this type of a structure. This is not a blueprint, it's an architectural drawing. Our building official will ultimately make the call on what's required in the way of signed, sealed architectural drawings. But this shows the general dimensions they're looking to get back to. And you can see here that the dimensions are that 28 by 32, which is the roughly 900 square feet. You also see the height of the eave on this structure is 8 feet at the lower eave, And there is a bit of a dormer on the upper level to allow some daylight into the structure, and I'll talk about that a little bit more coming up here. But my understanding is that is still not tall enough to reach that 14-foot eave height maximum. So we're not looking at the height issue here either, even though this looks relatively tall. It's still gonna be under that 14-foot eve height restriction. So if it is up to 14 feet, the setback from the lot line would normally be 15 feet. If you're down to a 10-foot eve height or less, then the setback is 5 feet. Oriented a little bit more to the site. Here's the couple of different overhead views, and then there's a street view, which I'll come back to. The street view kind of highlights that this lot is kind of well screened from neighboring properties. You drive by and there's a pretty regular pattern of lots on this section of Maple Row. So you see a lot of houses lined up fairly neatly, and you can't see too much in the backyard because of the way the vegetation lays out there. There's a good tree cover on the back of this lot as well, but you can see kind of the long, narrow aspect of these lots. Moving into kind of environmental overall view, there's no wetlands or easements that we're aware of on this property that become an issue. Zoning is in place. We're looking at zoning in, master planning for residential land use into the future. So no issues with the zoning or the environmental constraints on the property. So jumping into the findings of fact, remember you have to agree with basically 4 criteria and come to a consensus that you agree with all 4 of those by the way the applicant has described them to make a affirmative decision on your case. So I'll go through my findings and leave it to you and the applicant to talk through all 4 of them and see if there's some more detail that can be fleshed out and some consensus on the different items. But the first is that there's something exceptional or extraordinary about this lot that requires this type of a request to be applied for reasonable enjoyment of the property. In this case, the big question is what is unique about this lot that restricts the ability to come into compliance with zoning? On the one hand, you do have a narrow lot, and I think you can give some credit for that. On the other hand, I think that there is a way to rebuild in a way that steps this back from the lot line in a way that meets the code. There is an existing foundation there that the applicant would like to use, and I think that's a big part of this request. At the same time, you should be asking, is there something really unique about the property that makes it so he has to do it that way? So that's one thing that I kind of get stuck on with this request, because I don't think that there's anything particularly unique that limits the building from being a little bit smaller to come into compliance with current zoning, other than the existing foundation being in place.
Dan, what is the actual amount of distance the variance is for?
That's going to depend on how tall the lowest eave is adjacent to the adjacent lot line. My understanding is it's 8 feet on that side. I don't think they're planning on putting a dormer window on that side. So my understanding is it's within the 2 to 3 foot range based on not being 5 feet setback from the lot line. If it was a taller eave adjacent to the lot line.
So if it has to be 5 feet, what is it now?
3 feet.
3 feet, so we're talking 24 inches for a variance.
Yep. The second criterion is the preservation of rights, and the applicant correctly called out property in the vicinity of their lot over on Granada. There's also a slew of other cases, and I want to be transparent about this. The ZBA has looked at individual requests, and there's different reasons that they've justified setback encroachments from detached structures, attached structures over the years. There's certainly a case to be made for preservation of rights based on that, and I think that's all I'll say about that. We can go back to these individual cases if you'd like to go over them. With no detriment, I think you have to think about replicating this type of request and what is the intent of the code that underlies this request. So the big things here stem from kind of old school zoning. You're looking at safety, fire hazard. When you have structures too close to one another, too close to the setback line, if there's not a firewall, you get into the whole premise of zoning, which is to protect public health, safety, and welfare, and to avoid things like fires jumping across different property lines. There's also an aesthetic concern which may come into play. The current lot owner next door apparently has no issues with the request according to the applicant, and they're not here tonight, so it seems that there's no concern from an aesthetic standpoint from neighboring property owners, but that's one thing you'd normally look for as an issue with the setback encroachment. Here's just an overall look to show you what this will look like if it gets recreated to the form it was in before. And finally, not a general problem, I do think this is a fairly unique request. You have to look at these rebuilding of damaged structures on a case-by-case basis. And I think the year of construction of that building coincides with this being kind of an older lot with kind of a long, narrow configuration that makes this a unique request. So you could go either way. I think that there's grounds to work through regarding especially the no detriment in exceptional or extraordinary circumstances. No detriment, I think, because you're always going to be worried about replicating this type of request. Exceptional or extraordinary circumstances, I didn't see anything particularly unique other than the width of the lot that would make you have a case for that, being one of the justifications for approval. And I think it is possible to comply with the zoning, even if it requires a little bit more finagling due to the foundation being where it is. However, if you work through this case and you decide that a conditional approval can be considered, I have a few conditions that I would like you to consider, including kind of redundant conditions, but we want to call them out anyway. That you have to build this new rebuilt structure in a way compatible with the dwelling, and the way we've kind of decided that over the years is similar trim or primary color in terms of matching the house. Materials should be fairly similar, and if you're using any metal, it should be more architectural, and you should have no exposed fasteners on the outside, so you're not building, especially the side on the street frontage, with kind of pole steel where you have otherwise a vinyl or brick house. There should not be dwelling in the accessory building, and this is a relatively large accessory building for the size of the main dwelling, so that should not be a place where people are eating, using as a primary kitchen facility, primary bathing and sleeping facility. This kind of falls back on that Butterworth School criteria that we had 2 months ago, where we said, you know, if you're separating this into 2 living spaces, then you're talking about 2 dwelling units, and that's not appropriate. It should also not be used as a home occupation site. And again, the E-height should not exceed 14 feet anywhere on the structure, regardless of whether the dormer window is on that setback side or the other side. So those are the conditions I would recommend, and I encourage you to talk through all 4 of the variance criteria.
Okay. Anything the applicant would like to state this time?
Yeah. The fire obviously
I
was,
need your name, we're being recorded, so I need your name.
okay, my
and
name's
address.
Michael Quigley, and yes, I own 1401 Maple Row.
Thank you.
I bought that house September last year. A month went by and then this fire happened. I was still working on the inside of the house. We hadn't even moved in. So when I bought this, well, let me go back a couple weeks prior to that. When my wife had asked me about looking at this house to purchase this house, I was not interested in purchasing this house. I'd already finished the house I was in, and I was content. I went to this house for close to 2 weeks before I agreed to buy this house, because the homeowner did not live there, and he gave me permission to walk the property, think about it, and see what I thought. Now, the garage was a big part of it because it was such a large garage, and I liked the location because it was tucked away in the side. And that worked really well because from the back of the house, you can see the whole backyard. Now, we have 2 children, and I really didn't want to even think about trying to move the garage in that area behind to move it away, because then it blocks the whole backyard. You can't see it. And as you can see on the picture, to the left of the house, there's all trees. The ground is all uneven, and when this happened, my insurance did not cover enough to put a foundation in. They didn't even cover quite enough to rebuild the garage. So, I mean, I know that it's 24 inches, and I know that there's public safety. I understand that, but I'm really in a tight spot because I have no other way of rebuilding this garage. If it doesn't get put where it's at, I don't see it going back up, because I just don't see how I can relocate it in a spot where it doesn't work for us. If the garage wasn't in that location, I probably would have said, you know what, I don't really like the way it sets. And yes, as Dan said, the neighbor wasn't able to come, but I do have a note here, or a letter from the neighbor that he wrote, and I'll read it to you. To who it may concern. We would like to go on record as saying we have no objection to the Mike and Nicole Quigley garage at 1401 Maple Road being rebuilt on the existing foundation where the previous garage was. In fact, we would prefer the garage to have there, as it increases our privacy and helps block the wind from the snow and drifting of our driveway. So we hope you will approve their request. Thank you sincerely, Charlie and Gloria Longfellow, 1405 Maple Road. That's really all I have. I hope you see that, you know, this is not an ordinary situation. I don't know what else to say. I'm just hoping that you guys let us rebuild on that foundation, because I had it checked and they said it was fine. I understand that there's some updating to the code, as Dan was saying, material-wise. I plan on rebuilding the same garage, using the same materials as my house. After the garage burnt down, I ended up re-siding my house, the entire house, because it melted the whole back half of my house. I also put all new windows in the house at that time. I would be using the same materials. In the back of my house, I already have a pallet full of materials, siding-wise, so it would match my house, according to these measurements that you saw on the TV. So, I don't know. That's really all I have for you guys, so.
Okay, we probably might have some questions for you, so might
Sure.
want to stand there, okay? I'm going to turn it over to the boards for questions from you, or whatever they want to ask, okay? Any questions from the board, from the applicant? Go ahead.
Who made the determination that that slab is still fit for the rebuild?
Professional code inspectors, the same company that Walker uses here.
Any other questions or comments from the board, from the applicant?
Are you looking to put up a frame wall structure, or more like a pole barn
No frame wall.
frame wall? Does it need a footing? Does that slab have
No,
a
that's
footing
part
around
of
it?
the update coding. They're gonna require me to dig around the foundation 2 feet for a frost line,
Okay,
if this goes through.
Can you not downsize this somewhat? I mean, does it have to be the same as what you had?
I would like to keep it the same structure.
But you could downsize if you wanted to.
I don't know how you would be able to go back forward with it, and it just wouldn't be the same structure as what I'm trying to have
Footings would
kept.
be way off.
Yeah.
You have to put all new footings in. That would require you to put new footings in, right? On that one side, if you did that? Require you to put new
Yes, it
footings
will-
in on one side if
I
you
believe so.
shortened it up?
I'm not exactly sure how that would work.
Well, if you moved it 2 feet, I'm thinking you'd have to have new footings under that side, wouldn't you? Well, how are you gonna make, how would you make the wall fit on 2 foot off?
Well, I don't know if I know the answer. I think the building official would be the best suited to
Yeah.
answer, but I know that we do have a 600 square foot threshold where you can't just put something on top of a slab. You have to have a full frost
Yes,
foundation.
yes,
So it would make sense that if they have to move the wall in, they
Yeah.
have to move the posts and
yeah,
supports that
right,
over a couple of feet.
okay. Okay, any other questions from the board? I'm just gonna go down like Dan was talking about, you know, we got exceptional or extraordinary circumstances. And I just want the board to comment on what they think, okay, on the exceptional or extraordinary circumstances, which applies to this parcel or this particular variance request.
So I'd like to make a comment, maybe a question to the board. So
Sure.
if there was not a fire and we had reviewed the property, could we have enforced the ordinance?
I would say probably so.
Okay.
But then we get back to the exceptional or extraordinary circumstances, which apply to this case. So,
Well, that was my
You know,
point.
yeah.
So, because if the answer was probably not, then I think that would warrant that it is extraordinary and exceptional, right? Because it was already there.
Yep, it's
And a
non-conforming.
fire burning down is absolutely out of the ordinary.
Right, and
That would be my kind of
a
justification.
non-conforming use that wasn't in the zoning at the time.
Right.
Preservation of rights, we went through that, Dan went through that, we already, he stated the one on Granada, but I'm thinking that we have many more in the area that are pretty close to the same over the years, or lot line, approaching on the, side yard lot line or setbacks. No detriment, I don't know, you had a fire there, so, you know, as far as the public safety and whatever, to the adjacent properties, evidently it didn't have an effect on him, so, other than his own dwelling. And, so I don't see a safety hazard there, because it's already proven by the fire that it's probably not. I don't know what you think, the board.
I 100% agree with that.
And it says, you know, then we get down to, you know, not a general problem. Well, I don't see this particular myself, I don't see this as being a reoccurring situation with these same circumstances, is that ordinance should be changed or remodified. That's my personal opinion, but whatever the board thinks.
And didn't you say that when something like this happens, that's when we move things and bring it up to code and make things right?
They put a 75% rule in there, and I
Right.
think the idea was that if you're basically rebuilding an entire structure, you want to try to gear towards being in line with the current code. Now, that might have more credence if you're talking about a structure that's in a different part of the property, or maybe a non-conforming use, and you are operating a business where the principal building's going to stay where it is, you're operating an accessory non-conforming use out of a building that gets damaged. That's another case where it might also make sense to rebuild from scratch, basically, to allow the use to continue. That kind of thing. So there's a little bit of nuance built into that code, but the idea is after a certain point, you should try to come into compliance. Now, if this was a repair that was 74% of the appraised value of the structure, they would still be coming to you folks, but it would be a less stringent barrier of review. There's just a couple of things you'd have to help check the box on if they were rebuilding.
How do they figure those costs?
That's a good question.
Is that figured
What's the
on
cement slab
a
and
new
foundation?
garage?
I don't know.
What I've seen is that a builder itemizes a list of estimated costs for materials on the
Yeah,
building. The
yeah.
building official has accepted that appraisal. So this happened once on, I think, Rogers Street, another small lot. I think it's Roger, maybe Harding, back in early 2017, there was a structure that had a similar damage, and they provided a list of the different repairs, and whatever was kind of deemed as other improvements was kind of cast aside, and then the rebuild aspect of trying to mimic what was already there came in at less than 75%.
But how can you put a price on the slab and foundation that's there? If he had to replace the whole thing, what would be the cost of that slab and foundation?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be 25% almost of
More than that.
the rebuild?
Probably more.
Maybe more than
yeah.
that.
How do you value what it was, or what it would be to rebuild from the ground up, or everything that's there?
Yeah, there is a cost associated with that. And I don't know, right now what the cost is, but I would imagine most of the cost still comes in with the building, the vertical elements of the building, and with the new cost of materials, I think the estimation was this would be a kind of a new structure.
It's hard to tell from this view, aerial view that's there. Is there a driveway approach to that garage?
That's another good question that I think we should probably iron out how access is going to be served back there. We interpret residential parking in its own way, and there are a handful of gravel driveways, or kind of what we call non-compliant driveways throughout Walker. If this was a new site, or if they were trying to redo their driveway, we'd ask for some specific standards.
This almost looks like they've been parking on the front lawn.
Yeah, so, I'm not sure if there are plans to redo the driveway approach to the garage as part of this construction. If so, we would ask for, dustless, non-erodible driving surface and a hard surface for parking.
Because we just
Front
went through the
property.
parking ordinance for parking on your yard and
Yep, so wherever the cars are parked in the front yard should be on a hard surface.
it'd be on a hard surface. Yeah, it's hard to tell from the photo.
They had gravel in the front yard that looks like dirt that you see there, and yes, that's where they were parking.
On your diagram, you've got 3 overhead doors on the side
Yes,
with the dormer.
yes,
That's what you want to replicate?
yes.
That's the access into this building then, or do they come in from the other side?
There's a service door on the side, on the right.
Both sides?
No, just the
Just
right,
one
si-
side.
just right here,
Just
just the one side.
Okay.
Just the one side.
Nothing on the back side towards that other driveway?
No,
Okay.
Any other questions or from the applicant? If not, have somebody try to make a motion to close the hearing.
I'll make the motion to close the hearing.
Motion by Brian,
I'll support.
supported by Sandra. And all in favor of closing the hearing, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All same sign, hearing is closed. Now, if you want to go into the whatever we can, reasons and grounds, or whatever you need, wherever you're thinking. I think we've pretty much haggled them all over already,
We did.
so. I guess it's kind of up to the board, unless you have some more final questions from the applicant. Anybody care or ready to make a motion at this particular time? I can't.
Great.
You want to go down to the reasons and grounds again? Or you think we've covered it enough?
Dan, can you pull up the conditions again that you had in your slide?
I make a motion. I make a motion to approve the request with the conditions of approval being that the construction be compatible with the home. It's not to be used as dwelling or home occupation, and that the eave height at the dormer less than 14 feet?
I'll support that motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a support with those conditions. Anyone have any other questions or comments on the motion before I call for a vote? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion with those conditions signify by saying aye.
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 Hold the same sign.
Aye.
It is approved with those conditions. Okay.
Thank
I need
you.
a signature here, Roger, in a green shirt right here.
What's that?
I need a signature from you on Roger.
Can I make a copy? Do you want
Yes, you can have a copy.
Is this a copy for us?
No,
You
you
want
can
me-
have it.
Oh, I can, okay, thank you.
I'm sorry that that happened to
We
you
have
and they
6 to
had
1.
that fire.
Did we have a nay? 6 to 1?
Yeah.
Do we have a name?
Brian.
Sorry, I didn't hear it.
Thank.
Brian, right next to you.
Okay.
Brian was nay.
Didn't hear that.
Okay. Right down there, Nicole. Get a copy. There you go.
Okay.
That's it?
Have a good night.
Yeah. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay. Now we have a motion. We need a motion to untable the 4,000 Remembrance Road request.
I'll make that motion.
I'll support
By
it.
Sandra.
Sure.
Supported to remove it from the table. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All same sign is removed from the table. And the request is to withdraw the application. And I think we have a motion on the back sheet here to, okay? to
I'll make
formalize
that
it.
motion to withdraw.
Okay,
I'll support that.
I make a motion to withdraw the requested judgment that a mixed-use building under consideration by the Zoning Board of Appeals is similar to the permitted principal uses in this zone district and compatible with the intent of the Office Research and Parking Zone District, which is stated in Section 94-175A, regarding the property located at 4,000 Remembrance Road Northwest, PPN number 41-13-18-228-008, at the request of the applicant.
Support.
somebody else was supported, I think, already.
Patrick already did.
That was before she read it in
Supported it.
detail. That's okay, Roger can
Okay.
support it.
All right, Sandra, Patrick supported it. Any questions on the motion before I call for a vote? Hearing none, all in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All same sign. It is approved of withdrawal. Anything else you need to know, Dan?
Just on that note, just because the Vault Catering folks had their tenant move out of that deal to move in with their dance company, does that mean that they're stuck in the mud by any means? They're gonna be finaling out some inspections soon and getting their business going, so you might see some activity at that site. I'm sure you've seen some activity at that site on and off. So the sign go up and the old office building sign up front. Improvements are gonna come slow but sure on that property, I think, as this business develops. There's some minor landscaping that was done, minor paving, and we wish them luck. But they did withdraw consideration for the dance company tenant. So we'll see what other kinds of office tenants they get, if they get any. For next meeting, type of request that we've seen come in periodically this year is another request for an exemption from a public water and public sewer connection from a storage building. That's one of the, I think last year we had a lot of fun stuff. This year, this public water and sewer exemption is kind of the theme, so that's not as fun, but knowing that we have this requirement that every industrial or commercial building must connect to adjacent public water, public sewer, that doesn't necessarily line up with what the building code says, in the sense that there are some buildings that are considered not occupied or not workspaces. So we'll still review these on their own merits as they come in, but meanwhile, ordinance committee, in October, I'll be looking to take this issue up with the ordinance committee and get the ordinance cleaned up, to more align those two issues.
That's good.
That's September 26th, and then October 10th, I thought we were gonna have a day off, but there's another meeting, and that's for a land division item.
Okay,
Okay.
all right. All right, somebody care to make a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion by Roger,
Support.
supported by Sandra. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.